Thank you very much for letting me interrupt your afternoon. This is the Voice of Job Seekers Live, and this is just a live channel that I built on some of the platforms to discuss other things other than job search. But today we're going to create a little job search information portal for resumes in this particular episode. So I just want to let you know as well, Saturday morning I'll be back. And if some of you might be familiar with Terry Trespicio, she has a very popular TEDx talk that she's done, but she's also done this book about Unfollow Your Passion, which is based on what she's been saying for the past few years. So if you want to join me for that conversation, I know a lot of you know her. Feel free. This will be 10 o'clock Central Standard, 11 o'clock Eastern. So I want to be sure that you check that out. In the meantime, I bought Amanda Augustine around to join me for a little trends of resume trends of 2022. Yesterday, you heard me along with Hannah and Robin and Jag. We talked about the job search trends. This is resume trends. And I do this show on the podcast every single year, at least for the last 5 years, where we talk about the latest trends in resume writing. Of course, the pandemic has changed some of everything. So I want to say a big hello to Amanda Augustine. How are you?
Hello, it's great to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
Well, thank you. And you are the perfect person for this. And I might have another resume trends show somewhere along the line because things just keep tend on evolving, and you'll say some of that, though there's some things that have stayed the same. And I think the way that people market themselves are going to need to take heed of some of the things that might have evolved since the pandemic. Is there anything specific since the pandemic has started that may have changed your thoughts and your advice in the way that you've given? And you can go ahead and get that in as far as trends is concerned. So really, it's not just trends for 2022, but this is the stuff that people will need to apply to help them stand out, to be noticeable, and to show themselves to be a better fit for an employer.
No, I think it's a great question, and it's true. There are definitely some things that we're seeing changing, evolving based on what's going on in the job market and what employers and recruiters are looking for today. But I also think it's important to note that there are some really solid things that have remained the same and I think are important to remember and keep in mind. But starting with the stuff that's changed, I think the biggest one for me, and I've seen a lot of debate on it, is the fact that employers are expecting to see your COVID vaccination status on your resumes. And I feel that that's really kind of a hot topic because a lot of people
It
are
is.
concerned it's medical information, it's personal information. But, I know there was one study done by Resume Builder that found that approximately 30% of employers are saying that they are rejecting candidates just based on if that information is
Mhm,
not on their resume or LinkedIn profile.
mhm.
I've been running actually a similar study just to see, hey, am I seeing the same thing? Exact same split down. We're seeing about one in three are automatically dismissing the resumes. Not everyone who requires you to be vaccinated expects it to be on your resume, but it's obviously a trend. And so if you're comfortable sharing that information, it's best to put it on. And where I've been recommending placing that information is just at the very tail end of your professional summary or executive summary, that kind of main blurb in the third of your resume, after you've gone into more of your elevator pitch on why you're a great candidate for the type of role that you're targeting. Put in those little details. For instance, where we put if you're willing to travel X%, or you're bilingual or multilingual, or willing to relocate at your own costs, or you have a work visa for the US. All those little details we kind of shove at the end of that professional summary. And I think that that's a good place to put it. I don't think it needs to be bolded up in your contact information, but you do want it present so that it's being recorded. So that's one thing we're seeing. And
If
then,
I can insert a little bit
yes,
there,
please
I
do.
think it's important for healthcare professionals to be, if you're state funded or federally funded, it is required to have the shot in most places to where you work. So if you're
Yeah.
applying to somewhere where they require that shot and you to have this automatic rejection, and I think Sunday is the deadline to where if you don't have that shot, that there might be you may see a mass exodus in the market as far as people leaving having to leave because they refuse to get the shot. I
Oh, yeah.
think the other part to it too is that there had been some argument that that might have been that might get extended, though it
Mm,
doesn't look like that. And there was a National Law Review paper that I saw recently where the possibilities that there might be, and I wasn't clear on which section of healthcare it might be, but
mm,
they might extend it to January 8th. And it may have and those, and some of you who are watching, if you might be in the chat, and if you know about that, feel free to elaborate, and we'll be glad to highlight your comment on the screen. But I think that's very important to know, and I think it's very timely as for those who are in that particular sector, as well as there's some people in other sectors where there is still turbulence,
yep.
where those who get it and those who don't. There's been some discussion about, the whether or not that there'll still be testing done if you don't get it, and if you're not part of an organization. I think there's some states that have started to clamp down
Yeah.
and have given some dates. So I think people need to be aware of the whole spectrum as you begin
Yeah.
to say that, and I think is really important. A question for you. It might be
Yes.
a little bit off of that, but I was involved in the discussion on one of our shows back in September, and it became a thing as far as not just a resume, but putting it on your LinkedIn profile.
Yep.
And it really became a thing. I say I don't think that that's necessarily for a LinkedIn profile because
Mm,
it well, put it this way, it's a double-edged sword. You may agree or not agree, but it's a double-edged sword because people who kind of anti all of this may see it as bias, and then they do hiring as well as those who are all for it
right.
and require it. So did you have a particular, perspective on that?
Well, I think my point of view stems from the fact that even as a resume writer, a resume alone is not enough these
Right.
days when you're looking for a job, right?
Mhm.
You have to have when you're looking for a job, you are now a marketer and you are marketing the most valuable asset out there, yourself, your qualities, your candidacy, all the qualifications that you bring to the table.
Mhm.
We know that they're going to look online, they're going to look at your resume, and they're going to speak to you. And in all those instances, they want to see a consistent story playing out, right?
Right.
I see the LinkedIn profile as an extension of the resume and a more robust version because you can get a little bit more personal. You can use
Mhm.
pronouns. You can show a bit more of your personality and really play up some more multimedia elements that the resume can include a link, but it's not going to be exactly the same. It's a more cut and dried document by design. And
Mhm.
so, from that perspective, some employers are looking straight at LinkedIn profiles, some are looking at those resumes. I think you need to cover your bases. And the reality is that if you are applying for jobs where that vaccination status is required, where they're putting it in the job description. And I did find that those that said it's required, 97% of them said, and we're putting it in our job descriptions.
Mhm.
So if you're seeing it in the job description, in the types of
That
roles
kind of
you're going to target,
right. Mhm.
why not cover your bases? Because if a third of them are going to automatically ignore your application or your candidacy, regardless of where they're finding you, you don't want to be called out for that if it's something you have. Now, if you don't have it, that's a whole different situation. I would target employers where it doesn't seem to be in the job description because that probably means it's not a requirement. The majority are placing it there. If not, they will tell you on that first call. It seems to be very immediate because they don't want to waste their time and they don't want to waste your time, frankly.
Mhm.
So I more lean towards, hey, I want to make sure that I'm representing myself accurately and consistently across different mediums, different platforms, but also different recruiters are using different platforms to source candidates. And I wouldn't want a candidate of mine or a client of mine to be overlooked because they didn't include it there. And that's where the recruiter was sourcing for what maybe we call as passive job seekers, somebody who may be employed.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much for sharing that. I think people should be able to make a decision and will have to discern for themselves. The digger they deep into an industry, or if they're in the industry or away, they should know what the talk actually is. Not
Yeah.
everybody knows that, and not everybody goes that extra step, but that is a reason why you should research a company and to even try to talk to employees who've been in that
Yes.
company and former employees to find out as much as you can to see what the actual culture is. Because I've heard of some companies are totally like either or for, and they're talked about every day. So the sensitivity in the high alert is up. You want to appeal to that and not just be passive about it. Uh, Elaine Piper says that in Canada, I'm recommending job seekers include their COVID status in their cover letter. And okay,
Yeah. I don't think it's a
that's
bad idea.
I think that's appropriate, and, Canada has definitely their own and this is to say, bring up a bigger point, every country has a
Yes.
certain heightened alert,
Yeah.
or they may feel indifferently about it, and I think if you're in that country, that's something else you'll need to take, in consideration. Hi, Bernadette, who watches my stream seems like often. But she says, I advise clients this: the more you can organize your resume, show you that you can have the responsibilities listed in the job description, the better qualified you appear to be the prospective employers. And she's gone about her experience. And thank you, yes. And she's on both sides as a recruiter
That's
and
great.
as a career strategist. So that's a unique perspective. I think those kind of perspectives should inform you as a job seeker and what you need to do and how you need to go about it. You just need to be more aware for those steps. Okay, Amanda, what other trend are you seeing out there? And that was a great one. That's an important one. You hit the spot.
We saw this over the last, what, 18 plus months now, and I
Mhm.
believe we're gonna continue seeing it, especially since we now have that crop up of the Omicron. Omicron? Am I saying it right? The variant, the new
Omicron,
variant,
The Greek letter.
the Greek
Uh, yeah,
that
yeah,
new
we had
one.
Delta, Omicron. I'm sorry, I missed Alpha and Beta, but nevertheless, we went all the way to Omicron. Okay, so as you were saying,
We're because we're seeing this, there are so many people who or so many employers who said we're bringing back our employees to the offices in January. I think we're going to see a shift in that again because of this newest variant that's come out.
mhm,
It's still important to demonstrate that you're willing, if you are obviously, and capable of working remotely. And
mhm,
that's important to keep in mind. And there are various different ways you can kind of demonstrate that, yeah, I'm comfortable with this. And not only that, I can be efficient. Some of it gets worked in the resume, some of it can get worked into the cover letter. Things of Think of the skills that are most important, those softer skills that are important when you're working remotely: organization, digital communication, being proactive, managing your time, self-discipline, all those things. Now, do I recommend listing those out in a core competency section? Not really. It's not going to be very impactful. But I
right,
think you should think about how can you demonstrate that you possess the skills that are going to make you a good candidate to be working remotely, whether that's the tech skills you've gathered, the different project management or other platforms you've used in order to take your work and collaborate remotely with others. What communication tools have you been using? Slack, Zoom, Google Meeting, Skype, whatever it is. Try and demonstrate that stuff, as well as in your cover letter. I typically include a line that says, I'm comfortable and willing to work remotely. I have a dedicated workspace. I have high speed internet, and I'm comfortable leveraging various different platforms in order to communicate and collaborate with my team members. Something along those lines. And in any of your positions where you've worked remotely, I would include that as part of the location, or it could be included in parentheses next to the job title. If you, in the bullet section, which I always call bullet points equal bragging points, you draw the
mhm,
eye to the most important information that's going to be, bam, I'm proving I'm qualified and good at what I do. Successfully launched blah blah project with a 5-person remote team over blah time. Something like that, where you just kind of work in some of that language. And I would even make sure that I'm using variations of that in case you are applying for a job online and there might be an applicant tracking system involved that's scanning. So, remote, virtual, work from home, see where it's appropriate to maybe incorporate at least one instance of each of those, just to demonstrate that whether your company is going to be operating in a hybrid office model, whether you're going
Mhm.
to keep everyone remote or you have to for the short term. I'm someone who can jump in and acclimate and onboard to your organization, even if I'm not going to meet anybody face to face for quite some time.
Yeah, that is great advice. And even more so on your LinkedIn profile, like you've mentioned earlier, how
Mhm.
you can expand on whatever you had. And I would even be tempted to say, in some cases, share what you've done to prepare for remote working. And
Yes.
if you don't work remote, set up like you know how to work for remote. Talk about the security software that you have. Talk about how you have, the right equipment, that you have everything that you need to have a seamless transition to remote work so that people can say, oh, this person's already ready. And so that would be one less question that an employer asks. They'll concentrate on more what you can contribute rather than learning about your logistics, so to speak. Would you say that would be a good strategy?
I agree. Yes, 100%. You want to answer the questions that you think they're going to have. So they're not going to pass you over since they don't see the answer to it.
Right. And it
Recruiters are
doesn't hurt.
moving at a quick speed. They're reviewing
Right.
resumes very quickly.
Right, and it doesn't hurt to have a video. You don't have to show your whole home, but it does help to show the office space where you're working, and then maybe go a little bit into, if you wanna share a story, you can share stories of how you got from, not being prepared to preparing and your experience. But like I said, even if you hadn't worked, remote before, show that you can and that you're ready to kinda, scale back the questions about if you're able and that you can. So I think anytime you can scale back questions and have them focus more on what you're able to contribute, then I think it's definitely a plus.
And I think I love what you mentioned about, hey, how you can share different things. That's one of the great things about LinkedIn is that you don't have to
Hmm.
own a blog, or if you don't want to, it's a content machine. You can
Yeah.
produce content. So you could write an article on what you've learned since working remotely, or what you've learned since setting up for this, and how it's modified how you do your work, or how you prepare, or something like that, so that there's content that they're digesting. We know that the majority of recruiters are going to also glance at your LinkedIn profile. They're going to Google your name and look around. They want to make sure that the stories add up. But there's also this opportunity to provide this wealth of other content and information that can answer some of those questions that they may have, so that they're more likely to contact you in the first place.
Yeah. And you want to also keep off the language that may discourage a recruiter or an employer looking at your profile. If you always talk about being old school, that kind of that
Know your
causes
audience.
a
Know your
pause.
audience.
You've gotta know your audience. But having said that, though, posts can reach anywhere for the most part, not just your network, but once somebody shares your post, I see somebody who's a second or third connection, but somebody had commented, I have exposure to that post, and I'm out of your network as a third connection, and I can
Mhm.
still share it to my in one form or another. They can even take a screenshot, which
Yeah,
is kind of worse because then you really won't
can't delete it.
know. You can't delete it. Or somebody will share it if it's great information, but at the same time, stay away from the language that disparages not only an employer or the employer's process, but also your ability to be in the 21st century,
Yeah,
because that's just
fair.
it becomes a critical part of them thinking of you. This person can transition or not, and what you say can create doubt.
I think that's a great point, because that actually leads me to the next trend that I was going to talk about.
Okay.
So Top Resume ran a survey with recruiters, hiring managers, employers, anybody that I would consider as part of the hiring community.
Hmm.
And we asked them what skills have taken on greater importance since the pandemic has begun. And of course, wouldn't you know, all the top five were soft skills. And a lot of them had to do with being able to work remotely, being thrown curveballs and being able to handle that. I'm going to actually read the list just to make sure I get them in the proper order, because this is
Okay.
descending order. Adaptability and flexibility,
Hmm.
no surprise there. Communication, and I guarantee that has a lot to do with also digital communication. Critical thinking and problem solving, collaboration and teamwork, and time management. And I mean, there's nothing on there that I think anyone goes, "Oh, I would have never expected that." It makes sense given what's going on, how many people had to suddenly move remote, how they had to suddenly rejigger their businesses to still be functioning when they were forced to lock down. So it makes sense that these skills would be important. But I think it also brings up the point that you want to try and demonstrate these skills. And they're all soft skills, which is definitely a more challenging ask on a resume. How do you
Mhm,
demonstrate a soft skill that's not as easily measurable? It's harder to quantify. And so I would recommend taking a step back and saying, okay, well, when did I have to get flexible or adapt quickly? When did I need to pivot because of what was going on? I had to shift a project and suddenly make it work in a new environment, or I had to learn a new platform and then train others on it. How have you learned new skills or new platforms in order to communicate more effectively? How did you figure out the right cadence so you didn't have Zoom fatigue? All these
mhm,
things. Do you have to list every single one of these? Absolutely not. But if any of these really resonate, you say, yeah, that describes me. And I've done a lot of that. And I'm really proud of what I've done. I would at least identify one or two instances where you can bring those to light by kind of telling a story. We talk a lot about the STAR method, which is
mhm,
usually applied to the interview process, where you describe a situation or task, the actions you took to address the issue, solve the problem, accomplish the task, and then the results, the output, both good or bad, and what did you learn and what might you do differently next time. That's your typical interview format. You can take that same format though and leverage that to write out a bullet point on your resume that describes how you leverage these softer skills to provide value, cut costs, improve communication, boost employee morale, whatever it might be. There's a way to still tell a very short, succinct story in one bullet point that shows that anyone can write, I'm adaptable, I'm flexible on their resume. Every recruiter or employer is going to look at that and say, okay, great, you said you are, but prove it. And these are ways that you can demonstrate some of that information within your
I
resume.
was gonna say those are great points, and I think the first 2 are particularly I've seen where people don't always apply those that type of thinking. One was we kinda hinted about, like you said, adaptability and flexibility,
Yeah.
it in critical thinking, and I think a lot of that critical thinking you could tell by when people write out their posts or write out their comments, whether it's critical thinking or not. I mean, that might be arguable, but all that to say is that one of the elements in thinking critical is being able to put yourself in other people's shoes and be able to look at and say this is how they would think about me or this situation and how I can apply strategy to move things forward. And I think people mistaken that type of thing think that critical thinking is actually being critical,
Yeah.
which it is. But it's a element that what does resonate, and you can look at whether in a resume whether somebody has those elements or not. It's not going to be rocket science. For you to avoid it all is a red flag, but
Yeah.
to show it is going to say that you're willing to lean into those things, and that's a nuance that's not often said, but that actually happens in the mind. It only takes a second for someone who looks for that element all the time.
Mhm. And you know what? For those that are strong writers, that or somebody who's working one on one with a writer,
Mhm.
if that's not your strong suit, uh, what I do recommend for a cover letter, and this is something actually a guy named Danny Rubin, I don't know if you've ever had him on your show.
I've heard of him. Yeah.
Yeah, Danny Rubin used to do this years ago and do these workshops for college age students. But I've always loved this approach where cover letters can be boring, right? They can be very cut and dry. We know about 50% of employers pre pandemic would ignore a cover letter. But that's because
Mhm.
they normally are very templated, very generic, and they're
Right.
not that useful. They don't add value. One thing that he likes to suggest, and I've always thought was really cool, but again, you have to be confident in your writing skills, is if you
Mhm.
actually open with a story where you're taking one of those star method examples and you're elaborating on it and actually telling that story about how you arrived at something, but it's your opportunity to explain how you've leveraged certain skills in a unique way to come out and basically summarizing instead of saying, you're asking for this and I have that, you're asking for this and I have that, you're actually illustrating it in a way that's much more interesting.
Yeah, I like the idea of essential skills because really those are things that you can't not have
Right.
in your resume and indicate showing that you have that skill. Eric Kramer, hey Eric, he says I
Yeah.
like the SOAR method, situation, obstacles, actions, results format. There's a lot of
Yeah.
different. There's the CAR method. There's a
Yes.
number of different methods. I think
Yeah.
the thing is that there needs to be, the order makes a difference in the way that you're going to be perceived.
Yeah.
And I've known people even use some of these acronyms backwards, that they're willing to tell them this is a result and then go in and
Yes.
then go
Results
backward,
of
which
motion.
I think it all works. It's all part of the storytelling aspect of it. And I think no matter what you use, even though Star and Soar are pretty popular and the card method, I think it's very important that you show that you can communicate it well, communicate people need well, not what you want them to know, but what they need to know to
What they
hire you. So
Yeah.
those become important. And one more. Let's go. What you have another
Yeah.
one for us,
Sure.
Amanda?
And I would the only thing I'd say is that I think you were hinting at this, and it's something that's always been important. Show, don't tell, right? At the end of
Yes.
the day,
Yep.
show. Don't just tell them
Yes.
you have something, explain, give proof. So I think that's so
Yes.
important.
Yeah, and
Uh,
LinkedIn is a great place to show, use the featured sections of it.
yeah.
Use if you've done publications, there's a publication section below where you can show your honors and the places where you might have been quoted, or even that white paper that you did 5 years ago. That's okay too, because
Yeah.
that's published work, especially if it's peer reviewed. And Lord knows, don't talk enough about how white papers can really elevate. And I think just a real quick story, Amanda. My son is on a research team while he's in nursing school, and he was part of a white paper. It's huge.
Yeah.
It says it. If anything, if you're trying to position yourself as an expert, that is a surefire way of doing so. So, feel free to, but go ahead. I'm sorry, I
No, I
interrupted like
totally
a broken.
agree, and I would say for anybody who hasn't there are lots of people who are on LinkedIn on a regular basis, but if you haven't really taken a spin around and looked at the different additional sections they've added, the capabilities they've added to the
Mhm.
profile, it's time to take another look through there. Go to the help section and look at what they have specifically for job seekers, because there's so many additional things you can now add that weren't available even a year ago. And it's definitely worth taking a look and seeing what else you could add. Oh, I have to jump in. I love the T letter format as well. That is my favorite cover letter format. So here,
Yeah,
here.
and that's funny, and probably we could go on, but cover letters have kinda shortened since the pandemic. Before it was running, or uh, I've heard the 2 paragraph or the 150
Oh,
word thing, but I think too, they're now even becoming a little bit shorter than that, because I've even heard employers even said, "If I can't scan it in a certain amount of time,
yeah.
then it's too long." Your thoughts on that real quick?
I don't think it's has to be I personally don't think it has to be that short. I think you have to keep in mind that they're spending on average 7.4 seconds. It's no longer,
Mhm.
the old ladder study in 2012 was 6.2. It did go up to 7.4 in 2018. So it's still under 10 seconds, but they're spending a short period of time scanning your resume. So assume they're spending just as short, if not less,
I was
time
gonna say
on
this
the cover
because
letter.
because a lot of companies has said, "Stop sending me cover letters.
Yeah.
Stop sending me cover
But you
letters."
know what's so interesting? We did a study last September. So, granted, it's a
Mhm,
year now, but last September, we asked employers, are they more likely to read a cover letter now than before the pandemic? And my hypothesis was they're not reading them. Half of them didn't read them before. They're definitely not reading them now because they're
mhm.
inundated with applications. There's so many people unemployed. And I was wrong. In fact, there was a big middle part that was like, I'm neutral, but there was a much larger percentage that said, yes, I'm more likely to read them now than no, I'm not. And I thought that was very interesting. And I think that has to do with the fact that they were really trying to seek more of a connection. They're not interviewing people in person. They're trying to get more detail on who is this person that could potentially work for us if I'm never going to see them. So, my recommendation would be if they don't explicitly say, don't send me a cover letter, you should, but you
Mhm.
want to make sure that if you're sending it, it has the same visual balance that you're aiming for in a resume, which is again why I like the T format. It actually breaks it up and makes it very scannable. And the other part is leverage it if you're adding something other than regurgitating your resume. They're
The
going to
only
look at the resume. It has to be something interesting, new, some point that doesn't really realistically incorporate into a resume easily, but is important for them to know because it can help advance your candidacy.
Yeah, it's just that a lot of people just don't write cover letters well.
Great.
That's why I think a lot of people are kind of bullish on it, is that they don't write it. They don't. The presentation is not well presented because very
Yeah.
often they're too long. And
Yeah.
having said that, 150 words, though it's not is not that long. Is long for a lot of recruiters because we've had a
They've short
because
yeah.
I and I can understand that because a cover letter is one another thing where it's a double-edged sword. It's great if you got one as well written, but if
Right.
it's not well written, then
Hurts you.
it could
Yeah.
bias the rest of the reading of your resume if
100%.
they go that far.
Yeah, I would say if you're gonna write it, yeah, you wanna write it well. You want it tailored to the role. You don't wanna just be, command or control replacing Coke with Pepsi or, or
Yeah.
whatever it might be. It has to be tailored to it. I do agree. It's definitely, in my mind, it's a short one or two sentence intro paragraph, a middle section, a closing paragraph, but they are all short. But I
Yes.
don't think I'm sitting there counting, going, "Oh, it's over 150 words. This is too long." It really depends
Well, I
on
guess
how you're
I
breaking it
guess
up.
I guess in a sense, as many articles I've written, and even writing 800 words or 1,300 words, is that if you're not eye catching and if
Yes,
it's not aesthetically pleasing, then
yes.
it's going to be perceived as torture.
Dense blocks of text, but you also
Right.
don't want endless bullet points either. You don't want, we call it death by bullets. It's way too long if you have so many bullet points because eyes glaze over. The How you present the content is just as important as what information you decide to present. And I think that extends to the cover letter, and people often don't do that. They care about the resume, and the cover letter is an afterthought. I think I have to put something out there. I do it. If
Mhm.
you're not taking the time to format it properly, to your point, it's a double-edged sword. It's not going to help you. It could actually hurt you.
Yeah.
So think twice.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you have time to give us one more?
Sure.
Okay.
So you had asked me something about video resumes, and I don't know if it's too much to get into at the end.
You know what? We don't have to go there. I was
Okay,
trying to give
fair enough.
samples
Okay,
of what kind of
yeah,
but having said that, video resumes has been on and off of a thing for the past few years because
yeah,
now that we're in the video age, I think people are trying, in particular employers, they're trying to get creative in trying to make their work less. Now, I don't know the difference between scanning 6 seconds or doing something, watching something for 2 minutes
yeah.
or less. But having said that, being that a lot of casually go through our timelines anyway, we see what catches our eye.
Yeah.
So really, I would say any video contact that you might have could be a video resume if you consider that now the web in many sense is a determining factor or whether somebody should explore working with you or not.
Yeah, you know what? I don't think it replaces the traditional resume. I think if
Not yet.
somebody's asking, not yet,
Not
and
yet.
I don't think it's going to be next year either. I think
You
that
know,
that's farther
no,
out.
because I think we're still stuck on the fact that, that people look at these things as entertainment and not a way as to inform. So yeah, the perception is not there yet.
Yeah, I think there are so many, and I'm not going to say everyone because I know there's plenty of people who will say, but
Sure.
I'm not like that. But there are
Right.
plenty of recruiters and employers out there that say, I know how to scan a resume. I know how to do it quickly, and I know how to look for exactly what I'm looking for and know if this is somebody who's worth spending time on a phone call with. I don't think they're there with a resume or with a video resume. Now, do I think something with video, creating content about yourself in a way that showcases your expertise is a bad idea? Absolutely not. That's something you can upload
It's a
to a LinkedIn
thing.
profile. It can
It's
be
a
in a
thing. Yeah.
portfolio. We see things go viral all the time on TikTok and Facebook and Instagram, all those places.
Mhm.
So it doesn't hurt, but I wouldn't. I would not get rid of the resume yet. It's still the currency of recruiting. It changes, it adapts, its format's going to continue to evolve, but I wouldn't say it's gone. They've been saying the resume's dead for almost 20 years now, and it's still around. It just keeps evolving. So I think that's something to keep in mind.
Right. Yeah, agreed. Agreed. Any other thing, anything else you want to share before we close it down? I think we had a lot of great comments, and we had a lot of great discussion about what the future still look like. So you want to hold on to your your resume, not particularly paper. Nobody does that
Exactly.
anymore. Although there are people who still are faxing in this world even as we speak. But yes, it's true.
The only thing I would put out there is that, Top Resume did a study last September. I'm running one right now, and the preliminary results are coming in and trending very similarly, but we've actually extended it. We asked, does an employment gap lasting 12 or more months hold the same stigma that it did before the pandemic? And overwhelmingly, I'm at 86%, I think, right now, are saying, nope, not a big deal. Stop obsessing over it. Stop trying to fill everything out. Instead, demonstrate your capabilities. Show us what you can do. Show us your qualifications. We're not as hung up on that as you think we are. So don't let it distract you from your job search and from writing a really solid resume and presenting your information on LinkedIn. So I thought that was very interesting and worth putting out there. It's not as big of a deal as you think it is. And then the other thing is we are seeing this openness to what we call non-traditional backgrounds. So two trends we're seeing with job seekers is that given what's gone on in the past 18 plus months, all the things from the pandemic, from the Me Too, from Black Lives Matter, all that stuff, we're seeing people have different priorities when it comes to what they want out of a position, out of an employer, and
Mhm.
they're voicing that. And I think that's important. But we're also seeing that a lot of them are saying, if I'm going to work, I want to do something that's fulfilling and interesting to me. And, if I'm ever going to make a change, now's the time to do it. And while I'm not going to say overwhelmingly, employers are like, yes, I'm going for anybody. It doesn't matter if they don't have the education that I expect. We are seeing more openness. I think it was about 56% the last time I checked were saying, yes, I'm open to people with non-traditional backgrounds who come from different industries, different educational backgrounds that don't necessarily have that linear career path. And a big chunk was neutral in the middle. It was very small points that no, I'm not doing that. So if you are looking to make a change, it's a good time to explore that. And the most
Mhm.
important thing to do is to reevaluate your entire resume and reposition it, reframe it with that new goal in mind. And if you have any very specific jargon, industry terms that are so specific to a field that you don't want to do anymore, I would actually generalize and remove that so that they truly see your skills and not just you're coming from a different industry.
So really and this might be going a little bit beyond or it may have hit what you just said. So somebody who's changed jobs several times in the past 5 years, they're not being viewed as negative.
No, there's more of an open mind. There's more of an open mind if you're going for it. It's not necessarily someone who's done a lot of changing, but if what you've done most recently doesn't necessarily align with what you want to do next, it's not necessarily an automatic rejection. They're much
Mhm.
more open-minded to what do you bring to the table, demonstrate how you have the core skills we're looking for, or show us how you've made strides to cover any skill gaps that are really essential for this new role you're pursuing. They're
Yeah.
not automatically rejecting you.
Right. So really, it's all in the narrative,
Yes,
essentially. It's all
100%.
in the narrative, and that's been something that we've been talking about for a long time now. Concern that a lot of people have about job hopping and
Yeah,
as we call it, and I think there's strategic job hopping, which is very functional.
yeah,
Part of a career advancement strategy these days, especially if you're controlling the narrative. Not if you always seem to be on the bad end of controls, like, yeah,
mhm,
I got fired here, I had a discrepant argument with my boss here, or I didn't get along with the team, or I just flat didn't like the company anymore. Not talking about those things where there seems to be an ascension of skills and
yeah,
experience, and that they're able to say these are things that will benefit you and contribute to your company.
yeah. I'm taking you on a journey, and all these experience I had helped me gain these skills, gain this
Yes.
perspective, and has led me to this type of role and why I know that this is what I want to do next and this is how I can provide value. And
Yes.
I can even provide a fresh perspective because I haven't just done this my entire life. I've come from a lot of different areas, which means I have a lot of things I bring to the table. And if that's the
Absolutely.
narrative you're telling, it's a very positive narrative.
Absolutely. And I think people are trying to overthink this and say, why are they trying to change jobs? Or what are you running from? It's like, no, dude, I've been able to get people get big raises generally just for change jobs. If I went across the street to my competitor, if I was working downtown these days anymore, I'm past those days. But having, you know, going down, I'm going to get a 10% raise because they like me enough to hire me. That's without trying to negotiate.
Yeah.
But if I negotiate, I can probably get 20% or a little bit more even. And you do that times three in the last 3 years, you have now essentially in some ways have doubled your salary, especially if you include all the other compensation toys and parts that go along with it. So therefore, yeah, I can see why I want to have a better life and I want a better quality of life. That includes I want to do something I really like to do and I like to be paid for it.
Yeah. And I think you just have to be very careful about the narrative because, of course, nobody wants to hire you to know you're going to leave in a year. So you want to be
Right.
careful about, I'm looking for my home. I'm looking to place roots somewhere. I'd like it to be genuine if you're saying that. Don't say it if you want to leave quickly. But in
Right.
an ideal world, they want to feel that you're a good fit. But I also think depending on the role, a lot of companies understand that someone's not going to stay in this certain position for a very
And that's
long
very
time.
interesting. Very interesting. You should say that because when the COVID first happened, there were several employers who had expressed how people had said right off the top of the bat, "My company is going back into the office. I want to change jobs." Now, I don't think genuine, yes, authentic, yes, but is it a need to know? We can argue that part of it.
Yeah.
And that doesn't just apply to that particular strategy. There's a lot of people who've gone on to say what they really feel, which isn't really helpful to a job search. And you have to be judicious about the audience that you're looking for because if you're in the same industry now, these bosses talk to each other
Yeah.
and they're in the same network. And
Yeah.
I've seen where people have gone from interview with somebody else, but yet that was somebody's friend, that was somebody that they attended the same seminar or conference or something online, and they began to have a discussion about you. It's not going to work in your favor.
Yeah.
And I've seen that has happened. So we're not that 6 degree of separation anymore like we used to way back in the day. We're now, hey,
Yeah, I agree. I agree. It's whenever you're sharing information, you want to be authentic, but you also want to consider what you're putting out there. You
be
don't want to go,
shrewd.
oh, I don't care how much you hated your former employer. You're better off saying, we didn't see eye to eye on something or they were moving in a different direction. You don't have to get into the nitty-gritty. Nobody needs the TMI because every employer is thinking, well, if they're saying that about their past employer, what are they going to say about us?
Right.
And you want to keep that in mind. So it's a
Yeah,
balancing
yes, they
act
do.
for sure.
Yes, we do. And that lends to itself to another discussion and trend, but we won't hit that on this particular show right now since we're concentrating on resumes. But any lasting words before we shut it down for the day?
I think those are the big ones or the trends I'm seeing. We also know that more jobs are becoming location agnostic. So,
Hmm.
if you're looking for a job that's remote or in a completely different area of the country, I don't think you have to feel compelled to put your location information at the top of your resume. It's not as important anymore. And then regardless of what's going on, I think three things always stand true as to a strong and effective resume. And this was done in actually a white paper that we did a few years ago, where we
Hmm.
figured out, what are some of the primary differences between, say, a professionally written resume versus a self-written one. And there's three goals you're trying, or three criteria you're trying to meet: a
Hmm.
strong and clear narrative, which we talked about how important that is to explain the journey you've gone on that makes sense as to why you're targeting this role today.
Hmm.
Visual balance, again, something we touched upon, making sure that in a quick glance, they understand your qualifications, they understand why it makes sense that you're applying to this type of role. And then demonstrating your value. Again, backing up any claims that you make at the beginning of your resume with facts, anecdotes, case studies. And if you accomplish those three things, you're in a really good position.
Absolutely. Well, Amanda Augustine, how can people find more about you and what you
Thank you. You can always find me on LinkedIn, and the tail end of my LinkedIn profile is Job Search Amanda. Almost all of my social media handles have that. And if you go to topresume.com and click on career advice, you'll find my section there as well.
very good. Thank you very much for spending time with me. And for the rest of you, thanks for being involved in the chat.